November 14, 1962, 11:41 p.m. A car idled in Harlem rain while Bumpy Johnson watched a punch clock tick, knowing one driver would miss morning. The rain had settled into Harlem like it belonged there. Not heavy, not loud, just enough to slow footsteps and dull the shine of streetlights. Inside a narrow storefront office, the air smelled of damp coats and old paper. No one spoke. Bumpy Johnson stood near the back wall, close enough to the door to hear the street, far enough from the desk to avoid it. He did not sit. He rarely did when a decision was already made. His coat was still on. His hat stayed in his hand. That alone told the room this would be brief. On the wall, slightly crooked, a metal punch clock hummed. It ticked without rhythm anyone could argue with. Each second arrived, did its job, and left. It had no interest in who was watching. The driver waited near the desk, young enough to believe instructions mattered, old enough to know tone mattered more. His eyes moved once toward the clock, then back to Bumpy. He did not wipe the rain from his face. Outside, tires passed through shallow water. Somewhere close, a siren rose and fell, then disappeared. The city kept moving. Bumpy looked at the driver. Not hard, not soft, just long enough to be clear. The man straightened without being told. "There's a pickup," Bumpy said. That was all. No address, no time window, no description, just the word delivered flat like it had already happened. The driver waited for more. Nothing came. The punch clock clicked again. A patrol car rolled past the window slow enough to be noticed. Its headlights slid across the glass, across Bumpy's coat, across the driver's hands. The officer inside glanced in, saw nothing worth his evening, and moved on. The moment passed. The room did not change. This was the risk, brief, visible, contained. Bumpy did not look at the window. He did not follow the car with his eyes. He kept them on the driver, as if the street did not exist unless invited. The driver swallowed. "When?" he asked. Bumpy lifted his chin a fraction. "After dark." It was already dark. The meaning landed anyway. The internal deadline settled into place without being named. Payroll was due in the morning. Cards would be checked. Columns would have to agree. They always did, until they didn't. The punch clock hummed, patient as a witness. The driver shifted his weight. "What am I picking up?" Bumpy stepped closer to the desk now, close enough for his shadow to touch the paper stacked there. He placed his hat down once, carefully, as if setting a rule. "Nothing," he said. The word did not sound like a trick. It sounded like a fact. The driver nodded, though he did not understand. Understanding was not required, only alignment. Bumpy's voice lowered, not in threat but in finality. "Clock in when you're done." The driver looked at the wall again. The clock's face was scuffed, the glass dull from years of fingers and breath. It did not look dangerous. That made it worse. He reached for his coat. Bumpy picked up his hat and turned slightly toward the door. The approval had already been given. There was nothing left to add. The punch clock ticked. As the driver stepped out into the rain, one question settled into the room and stayed there, unanswered and steady. What happens when a man finishes a job that was never there, and the clock is waiting? The door closed behind the driver with a sound too soft to mark. The rain swallowed him quickly. Bumpy Johnson did not follow him out. He stayed where he was, listening to the city resume its ordinary breathing. The punch clock kept humming. A man at the desk shifted a ledger closer, then stopped himself. He knew better than to tidy a moment that had already been set. The room understood that something had been approved, and that approval was complete. Nothing else would be discussed. Bumpy moved to the window and looked out at the street, not searching, not checking. Harlem was where it had always been. Wet pavement, dim light, people going home, people going nowhere. The city did not change for errands, phantom or otherwise. Behind him, the clock ticked again. Someone cleared his throat. It went unanswered. Bumpy turned back to the room. "Make sure the books are ready," he said, not as an order, as a reminder. Morning would come on its own. "Yes," the man at the desk said. He did not ask which books. There was only one set that mattered. Bumpy adjusted his coat, slow, deliberate. He had not raised his voice once. He had not repeated himself. He had not used a name after the first moment. None of that was necessary. Harlem had long learned the difference between instruction and permission. Tonight had been permission. The risk had already passed. The patrol car was gone. The street had accepted the driver. What remained was quieter and heavier. Bumpy reached for the punch clock and placed 2 fingers against the metal casing, not to stop it, not to test it, just to feel its vibration. It did not react. It never did. He withdrew his hand. "Time keeps," he said, almost to himself. The men in the room heard it anyway. Outside, the rain thinned. Somewhere blocks away, a door slammed. A laugh broke and ended. Harlem kept its rhythm without waiting for anyone to return. Bumpy took his hat and headed for the back exit. He did not look at the clock again. He did not need to. Its work was already in motion. As he opened the door, the man at the desk spoke, "Careful. If he's late." Bumpy stopped. He did not turn around. "He won't be," he said. That was not a prediction. It was a measurement. The door closed. The office settled into stillness. Paper, ink, wood, the clock. Minutes passed, then more. The hum never wavered. The men returned to their tasks. Pages were turned. Numbers aligned. Columns waited to be filled. The system did not ask questions. It only recorded. Near midnight, the clock marked another minute. The driver did not appear. No one commented. The absence had not yet arrived, but it was already forming, like a shadow before the body reaches the light. By the time the rain stopped, the street was empty. The pickup, if it could be called that, continued without witnesses. The clock kept time. And somewhere between now and morning, without urgency, without pursuit, one simple fact moved toward certainty, carrying a single unanswered question with it. When the clock waits and a man does not return, does the record punish him, or does it simply tell the truth? The street took the car without comment. Water lifted under the tires and fell back into place. Storefronts closed themselves behind glass. Harlem at night did not watch. It remembered. The driver kept both hands on the wheel, not tight, not loose, the way men hold something when they intend to finish. He drove past corners he knew and turned where there was no reason to turn. The pickup had no address. That was the point. He did not look for one. A lit precinct window slid by on his right. Faces moved inside. Paper lifted. Someone laughed. The car did not slow. The moment was visible, then gone. Risk, brief and contained, sharpened and released. The punch clock stayed with him. Not the sound, just the idea of it. Metal, glass. The steady count that did not care where you went, only when you returned. He drove until the streets thinned and the rain gave up. He parked, stepped out, and stood with the engine ticking itself cool. Nothing waited for him. No door opened. No signal came. The pickup was exactly what Bumpy had said it was. Nothing. He checked his watch once and put it away. No countdown, no rush. Morning would arrive on its own. When he drove back, the office lights were still on. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room held its shape. The clock hummed. Bumpy Johnson sat at the desk now, hat set aside, ledger open but untouched. The driver stopped a few feet away. He did not explain. He did not apologize. He did not need to. Bumpy looked up. "You're back," he said. "Yes." "What did you get?" The driver met his eyes. "Nothing." Bumpy nodded once. "Good." Silence did the rest. He closed the ledger without writing. "Time tells on everyone," he said, calm as weather. The clock ticked. The truth had surfaced. No voices were raised. No action followed. Bumpy glanced at the wall, then back to the driver. "Clock out when you're done." The driver understood too late what done meant. The room waited, certain, and left one question standing between them. If the errand took nothing, what exactly would the clock refuse to take back? The driver stayed where he was. He did not step toward the wall. He did not reach for the card. The punch clock hummed as if it had always been waiting for this pause. Bumpy Johnson watched him without pressure. The ledger remained closed. Nothing in the room suggested a next move. That was the point. When there is nothing to react to, a man has to listen to himself. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere nearby, a radio played low and then went silent. Harlem did not interrupt. The driver finally spoke. "If there's nothing to clock." Bumpy raised a hand, not to stop him, to measure the sentence before it finished. The driver cut himself off. He knew better than to complete a thought that had already been judged. Bumpy leaned back in the chair. Wood creaked once and settled. "You came back," he said. "That's something." The driver nodded. He did not smile. "And you brought nothing?" "Yes." Bumpy stood. The chair slid an inch and stopped. He walked to the wall and stood beside the clock, close enough to feel its warmth. He did not touch it this time. "This thing," he said, eyes on the face, "doesn't care about reasons." The driver waited. "It cares about marks," Bumpy continued. "In and out, here and gone, it's honest like that." The word honest landed and stayed. The driver looked at his hands. They were clean, no grease, no dirt, nothing to show. He flexed his fingers once, then let them rest. Bumpy turned to him. "You wanted to make room for you." The driver did not answer. He could not deny it. Bumpy's voice did not change. "It won't." The clock ticked. A second passed, then another. The room did not rush to fill them. "Clock out," Bumpy said again, not louder, closer. The driver stepped forward. He took the card from the rack. His name was printed cleanly at the top. He held it, feeling the thin edge bend slightly under his thumb. He slid it into the slot. The machine clicked. Metal met paper. The mark printed itself where it always did. The clock accepted the time. The driver pulled the card free and stared at it. The ink was sharp, precise. It did not ask questions. It did not explain. Bumpy nodded once. That was enough. "You can go," he said. The driver hesitated. "In the morning." "In the morning," Bumpy said, "the books will open." He did not say more. He did not need to. The driver placed the card back in its place and stepped away. He reached for his coat, slow, as if speed might argue with what had already been decided. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around. Was there ever a pickup? Bumpy answered without looking at him. There was. The driver left. The office returned to its quiet. The ledger stayed closed. The clock kept humming. Bumpy remained by the wall for a moment longer. He watched the second hand complete its circle and begin again. No drama, no change, just motion. By morning the room would fill. Pages would be turned. Numbers would be checked. The mark on the card would sit where it belonged. One mark, clean, correct. And beside it, where something else should have been later, there would be nothing. That absence would not shout. It would not accuse. It would simply exist. Bumpy took his hat and walked out the back, leaving the clock to do what it had always done. As the door closed, one last question settled into the space and refused to leave. When the record is perfect except for what never comes back, who does the silence belong to? Morning arrived without permission. Light pressed against the windows, pale and steady, the kind that does not ask how the night went. The office door opened on schedule. Chairs were pulled back. Coats were hung. No one mentioned rain. The punch clock was already awake. It hummed the way it always had, as if it had never slept. The metal casing held the night inside it without comment. Bumpy Johnson was not there when the first man entered. That was noticed. It was not questioned. Bumpy did not need to be present for his decisions to stand. The room had learned that years ago. The ledger came out, pages were smoothed. A pencil was sharpened once and set down carefully. The internal deadline arrived and took its seat at the table. Payroll did not announce itself. It never did. It simply waited to be matched. Cards were pulled from the rack one by one. Names, times, clean marks aligned where they should. The system moved forward without pause. When the driver's card was reached, the room slowed. Not stopped, slowed. The mark from the night before was there. Sharp, correct. It sat exactly where the clock had placed it. No smudge, no hesitation. The clock had done its part. There was no second mark. No one spoke. The man at the desk held the card a moment longer than necessary, then set it down. He did not look around. He did not sigh. He simply moved to the next column. Absence did not need a voice. Outside, Harlem continued. Shops opened. Buses hissed at the curb. A man swept water from a doorway and pushed it back into the street. Life accepted the morning without ceremony. Inside, the ledger filled. Numbers agreed, totals balanced. The books did not bend to fill the gap. They never had. Someone reached toward the clock, then thought better of it. The machine did not need help. It had already said everything it would say. Bumpy arrived after the first totals were written. He came in through the back, coat dry now, hat in hand. He glanced at the ledger once, then at the wall. The punch clock hummed. He did not ask a question. "That all?" he said. "Yes," the man at the desk replied. Bumpy nodded. He did not lean in. He did not inspect. He trusted the process because he had built it to speak without him. He turned to leave. Behind him, the clock marked another minute. The office returned to work, steady and quiet, as one certainty settled deeper into the day, carrying a single pressure question that no one tried to answer. When morning accepts an absence without protest, is the judgment finished, or has it just begun? The day moved forward the way days always do when nothing is argued with. Papers were stacked. Coins were counted. Doors opened and closed. The office did not adjust itself around the missing mark. It refused to. Bumpy Johnson stayed only long enough to see the rhythm return. He sat once, not because he needed to, but because the chair was there. From that position, he could see the clock without turning his head. The driver did not come back. That fact settled into the room like dust, not sudden, not dramatic, just present. A clerk approached the desk with a question that had nothing to do with time. Bumpy answered it. Another man asked about an account 2 streets over. Bumpy nodded. Work continued. Authority does not pause for what has already been decided. The punch clock marked the hour. The sound was soft, almost polite. It did not announce itself. It simply moved. Someone mentioned the driver's name once in passing, as if checking a habit. The name hung for a moment and then dropped away. No correction followed. No instruction was given. Bumpy stood and walked to the wall. He placed his hat on a hook beneath the clock, aligning it so it did not tilt. He did not touch the machine. He did not need to. "We don't chase time," he said. The men heard it. They always did. By midday, the ledger was closed. The totals were final. A decision had passed through the system and come out clean on the other side. No stains, no noise. Outside, Harlem warmed. Children crossed the street with their lunches. A vendor called out prices and laughed at his own joke. The city accepted the day without knowing what it had already accounted for. Bumpy returned to the desk and picked up the driver's card. He did not read it. He did not turn it over. He slid it back into its place in the rack, exactly where it belonged. There it would stay. Not as a warning, not as a trophy, as a record. He took his hat and put it on. The hook was empty now. The clock kept humming, unbothered by the exchange. Bumpy moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused once, just long enough to let the room notice. "Leave it," he said. The man at the desk nodded. The door closed. The office returned to its steady order. The driver's name remained on the rack. The space beneath it remained blank. No one filled it in. And as the afternoon settled, one last pressure question pressed quietly against the walls, unanswered and heavy. When a system holds its shape without a man in it, does that absence erase him, or does it define him forever? Afternoon thinned the office light into something flat and honest. Shadows shortened, dust showed itself, nothing hid. The punch clock kept humming. Bumpy Johnson was gone again, and the room did not wait for him. It did not need to. Authority, once set, does not linger to be admired. It leaves and lets the structure speak. The ledger sat closed at the edge of the desk. Final, no erasures, no notes in the margin. The numbers had agreed and moved on. That was the end of their role. A man reached for the rack of cards and stopped. He already knew what he would see. He checked anyway. Habit is stronger than curiosity. The driver's name remained printed at the top, clean, centered. The card beneath it showed the single mark from the night before, nothing after, no return. The absence was precise. That mattered. He slid the rack back into place. Outside, Harlem moved through the afternoon without hesitation. Traffic thickened. Music leaked from a window. A delivery truck blocked a hydrant and then pulled away. The city did not hold space for questions. Inside, a new card was prepared. Not a replacement, just preparation. Blank stock cut clean, waiting for a name that would earn it. Systems do not mourn. They adapt. The punch clock marked another minute. A man asked if the driver had called. The answer came quick and quiet. No. That was enough. No one speculated. No one assigned meaning. They had learned that guessing weakened certainty. The record already said what needed to be said. Bumpy returned near the end of the day. He stood in the doorway for a moment, coat still on, eyes taking in the room without stopping anywhere. The clock was where it had always been. The rack was full. The ledger was closed. He nodded once. "Everything square?" he asked. "Yes," the man at the desk said. Bumpy stepped inside and removed his hat. He set it on the desk, not beneath the clock this time. Some habits belong to the living, others belong to machines. He walked to the wall and stood beside the clock, close enough to hear its hum without leaning in. He listened, not for sound but for consistency. It did not disappoint. "This thing," he said, not turning, "never forgets what it never gets." No one replied. He looked at the rack once more, then away. He did not touch the card. He did not need to. The consequence had already settled. As the afternoon leaned toward evening, one final pressure question took shape and stayed unanswered, quiet and firm. When a clock keeps perfect time but records only one side of a return, is the judgment finished, or is it simply permanent? Evening came back the way it always did, without ceremony. The office lights stayed on a little longer. Windows reflected faces instead of streets. The day folded itself and left. The punch clock kept humming. Bumpy Johnson remained only long enough to be sure nothing had shifted. He did not check the books again. He did not ask for updates. The system had already spoken. Asking it to repeat itself would have weakened the lesson. He moved the ledger an inch to the left, aligning it with the edge of the desk. Not correction, order. Small habits carry weight when they are consistent. A man approached with a question about tomorrow. Bumpy answered it. Another asked about a delivery that had nothing to do with the night before. Bumpy nodded. Life continued inside the frame he had set. No one mentioned the driver. That silence was not avoidance. It was agreement. Bumpy stood and placed his hat back on his head. He paused once more by the wall, letting his eyes rest on the clock's face. The glass was scratched. The numbers were faded. It had outlasted men louder and stronger than the one who failed to return. It would outlast him too. He turned to the room. "Lock up when you're done," he said. No emphasis, no warning. The men nodded. Bumpy left through the back door. The sound of it closing did not echo. It never did. The office settled. Chairs were pushed in. Papers were stacked. Lights were turned off one by one until only the small bulb above the clock remained. It was left on deliberately. Time should never be in the dark. The clock ticked. Outside, Harlem took the night back. The rain did not return. Streetlights warmed the sidewalks. People moved in pairs and alone. The city did not look for anyone who had learned not to be there. Inside, the rack of cards stood as it always had. Names aligned. Gaps respected. The driver's card stayed where it belonged, neither removed nor marked beyond what was already true. No note was added. No explanation was written. That absence became part of the structure, not an exception to it. By closing time, the system was complete, not because everything was filled in, but because nothing needed to be forced. The punch clock marked the hour. The sound was soft, final, without drama. Morning would come again. New cards would be used. New marks would be made. The record would continue, clean and unbent. Somewhere the driver would not be part of that continuation. Not erased, just concluded. Bumpy Johnson did not follow him. He did not need to. Judgment, when done properly, does not chase. It stays where it is and lets the world adjust around it. The only thing left behind was the object that had been there from the start. Metal, glass, motion, a habit of truth. The clock kept time. And for anyone willing to look at the rack and the blank beneath one name, one last question waited, quiet and unavoidable, asking to be weighed rather than answered. When a system leaves room for absence and calls it truth, is that justice, or is it mercy in its most unforgiving form?